The first time Elowen saw the scar, she did not flinch, yet the cold knot in her chest told her it was more than flesh. It ran jagged across his shoulder, blackened like charred wood, and burned with the memory of treachery. "It's not a scar. It's a sign of betraying," she whispered, voice trembling. The Apache warrior, seated by the dying fire, lowered his head, the weight of shame bending his broad shoulders. Dust swirled around their camp as the desert night exhaled, carrying the distant cry of coyotes. Elowen's hands were calloused but soft in the flickering firelight. She had tracked him for weeks across the jagged mesas and sagebrush plains, driven by a secret she had held since childhood. Her eyes, dark as desert soil, scanned the horizon. Somewhere beyond the ridges, the men who had torn her family apart roamed freely. Her pulse thumped against the ribs beneath her leather vest, a rhythm warning of the storm to come. He finally looked up. His face, streaked with ash and dust, betrayed both fear and sorrow. I tried to protect them," he said, voice rough like sandpaper over raw timber. But the mark on his body told another story. Betrayal had its own language, etched in skin, and even the moonlight could not soften its truth. Elowen clenched her fists. She was a woman forged by fire and survival, but even her heart ached at the sight of him, the man she had loved before suspicion had fractured their bond. She remembered the night of the raid, the way he had disappeared into the chaos, leaving her family vulnerable to the invaders. And yet, seeing him kneel in regret, she felt the tug of a loyalty she couldn't name. The wind brought the scent of smoke and iron, a cruel reminder of the massacre that had claimed her kin. She had grown up knowing the desert's quiet wrath, the sting of sun on her skin, the whisper of rattlesnakes underfoot. Each step across these mesas had been a step closer to justice or vengeance. But now, standing before him, she realized that the line between the two was thinner than a blade's edge. "Why now?" she asked, voice breaking, though she swallowed the bitter taste of anger. "After everything?" He lifted a hand, trembling, to the scar that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "Because I can't hide it anymore. Because hiding only made me weak. I thought I could bear it alone, but the shame has grown heavier than any blade." Elowen's breath caught. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night sky, mingling with the first stars of evening. Shadows danced across the canyon walls, echoing the turmoil in her soul. She had tracked men, risked ambushes, survived the harshest nights, but standing here, she felt the raw vulnerability of both hunter and hunted colliding. Finally, she stepped closer, boots crunching on parched earth. The warrior's eyes widened, not with fear, but with an unspoken plea, one that only someone who had shared both love and loss could understand. "If this is your confession," she said softly, "then show me the truth behind the scar. Show me why it marks betrayal. Or prove that it doesn't." He nodded, the firelight reflecting in his eyes like molten copper, and slowly, painfully, began to tell the story etched into his skin, a story of choices, of secrets, and of a night that had shattered them both. The desert stretched endlessly, a quilt of burnt gold and silver sage under the harsh glare of the midday sun. Elowen trudged ahead, the coarse leather of her boots scraping against the sun-baked earth, her heart a drumbeat of anticipation. Behind her, the Apache warrior followed in silence, the scar on his shoulder a permanent shadow across his broad chest. Every step carried the weight of memory of blood spilled, promises broken, and the bond stretched thin. "Elowen," he said finally, voice low, rough like sandpaper. "We should rest near the canyon ridge. There's shade, water, and a pool, I know." She glanced back, her eyes narrowing against the glare. "We don't have time to linger. Every hour we waste, they move closer to the ones who betrayed us." He sighed, setting down a small bundle of supplies. "You move too fast." The desert punishes those who ignore it. Elowen ignored him and walked on, her hands brushing against the sagebrush. The leaves whispered secrets as if the land itself knew her pain. Memories came unbidden, the night the raiders stormed her village, the fire swallowing her home, the cries of her kin echoing into the dark. And him, her love, her companion, who had vanished when she needed him most. Her chest tightened. The desert wind brought the faint scent of smoke and dust, reminders of that night, a cruel echo that refused to die. "Why did you leave?" she demanded, her voice barely above the wind. He looked away, jaw tight, eyes dark pools of shame. "I thought running would save them." "Save you? I miscalculated. I was weak." Elowen clenched her fists, the leather of her gloves cutting into her palms. "Weak? You left my family to die while you hid in the shadows." Her words stung, carried on the wind like arrows. He lowered his head, letting the words land. The silence that followed was thick, punctuated only by the distant screech of a hawk circling the cliffs. Then, in a voice nearly drowned by the desert's heat, he began recounting the night of betrayal, every choice, every forced decision that had led to the scar he bore like a confession. "I couldn't fight them all. I thought I could distract the raiders, draw them away. But when I returned," his voice broke, "I found ashes, nothing but ashes and screams in my mind." Elowen's eyes glistened with unshed tears. The wind tugged at her hair as she fought to breathe, to stand tall, to contain the rage and grief threatening to spill over. The scar on his shoulder, jagged and raw, was a visible reminder of the consequences of choices, of betrayal real and perceived. Hours passed, the sun sliding toward the horizon, painting the canyon in shades of molten gold and bruised purple. Finally, they reached the ridge he had promised. A small pool shimmered in the shadow of towering rocks, the water still and clear, reflecting the sky and the jagged cliffs around it. Elowen knelt, cupping water in her hands. The cool liquid soothed her parched throat and stung her palms, a reminder that even in the harshest desert, life could persist. She glanced at the warrior, whose eyes never left the horizon, alert to every movement of the land that had been both sanctuary and enemy. "Do you truly regret it?" she asked softly, her voice almost drowned by the whisper of wind through the rocks. He turned, shoulders squared despite the scar that marred them. "Every day. But regret alone cannot undo what was done. Only action, only loyalty now can." Elowen studied him, the weight of his words sinking deep. She had hunted men through deserts, crossed rivers under fire, survived storms that would have killed ordinary souls, but this test of trust and truth was heavier than any she had faced. Night fell, painting the sky with a tapestry of stars so brilliant it seemed to burn away the desert's shadows. They made camp by the pool, fire crackling weakly against the chill creeping over the canyon. The Apache warrior sat shirtless, muscles tensed even as he tended the flames, and Elowen felt the pull of history and fate weaving them together, two souls scarred by betrayal, yet bound by a shared fragile hope. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the desert seemed to hold its breath. The path ahead was uncertain, lined with threats both seen and hidden. But for the first time in weeks, Elowen sensed a fragile possibility that truth might heal, and betrayal might yet be redeemed. Night had fallen over the canyon, and the stars glimmered cold and distant like watchful eyes. Elowen sat by the pool's edge, knees drawn close to her chest, the water reflecting the moonlight as if the desert itself held her secrets. The Apache warrior sat across from her, muscles tensed even in repose, firelight dancing across his broad chest and the jagged scar on his shoulder. Every movement he made seemed deliberate, measured, as though the desert could read his intentions. "Elowen," he said softly, the words carried on the whispering wind, "there are others, ones who know your family's fate." They're not far behind. Her gaze hardened. I've survived the desert, the storms, and the men who thought they could bury me. I can survive them too. He nodded, but the shadow of doubt crossed his face. Not alone, he corrected. The desert is merciless. The wrong step, the smallest hesitation, it can be fatal. She stared into the still water, memories of fire and blood rising like smoke in her mind. The night her family had been attacked, the raiders' torches burning everything she held dear, and the desperate faces of those she had loved haunted her still. And him, her companion, who had vanished when the flames consumed her world. Yet here he was, standing scarred and repentant, his loyalty tethered to a rope that both frightened and fascinated her. Suddenly, a rustle echoed from the canyon rim. Both of them froze, eyes scanning the shadows. A figure appeared, cloaked in the night, moving with the stealth of someone who knew the land intimately. The warrior's hand went to the dagger at his hip, muscles coiling like springs. "Show yourself!" He barked, voice low and threatening. The figure stepped into the firelight, a man with a tattered coat and cruel eyes, the unmistakable mark of the bounty hunters who had tracked them across the desert. His grin was sharp, predatory. "So, the girl who survived and the scarred man trying to atone," he sneered. "I wondered if you'd make it this far." Elowen's pulse surged. She rose, hand on the bow slung across her back, her mind racing. The desert had taught her how to breathe with danger, to anticipate the strike before it came. The warrior stepped beside her, his bare chest glistening in the firelight, scar a stark testament to past battles. "You won't take us," he said, voice a growl, eyes blazing. "Not tonight." The man laughed, low and cruel. "We'll see about that." In one swift motion he lunged, dagger glinting in the firelight. Time slowed. The warrior met the attack with raw strength and skill, the dagger clashing against the edge of his own weapon. Sparks flew, lighting the canyon in bursts of molten gold. Elowen knocked an arrow, aiming with precision honed from years of survival. With a sharp twang, the arrow struck the man's shoulder, forcing him back with a grunt. The desert held its breath as the standoff continued. Elowen's eyes met the warrior's, a silent exchange of trust, pain, and unspoken history. Every movement was a dance of survival, of reckoning with shadows both external and internal. Finally, the bounty hunter fled into the night, wounded but alive, leaving them with the echo of his threats. The desert fell silent again, save for the crackle of the dying fire and the whisper of wind through the sagebrush. Elowen exhaled, muscles trembling with adrenaline. "They won't give up," she said, voice low, almost a whisper. The warrior rested a hand on her shoulder, scar and all, a grounding presence. "Then neither will we. But we face them together now, not as hunter and hunted, but as allies." For the first time since the journey began, Elowen felt the fragile thread of hope weave through her chest. The desert was still dangerous, filled with betrayal and hidden enemies, but at least now the weight of survival was shared. Together, scar and spirit, they would navigate the treacherous path ahead. Above them, the stars blinked down cold and distant, yet their light held a promise, the promise that the past shadows could be faced, the pain acknowledged, and the choices of the heart might yet lead them to justice. The desert sun rose like molten gold over the jagged cliffs, painting the mesas in shades of fire and shadow. Elowen's boots crunched over the cracked earth as she moved with cautious determination. The Apache warrior close behind, bare chest glinting with sweat, muscles taut and scarred shoulder catching the light. The air was thick with heat, dust, and the faint tang of sage, a scent that had become as familiar to them as the pulse in their veins. "Elowen," he said, voice low, carrying the weight of warning, "we're being followed." "I can feel it in the wind." She turned her head, dark eyes narrowing against the sun's glare. Across the ridge, she could just make out movement among the rocks, figures stalking them like shadows. Bandits or rival Apaches seeking revenge, it didn't matter. Danger had a name now, and it was written across the desert itself. They climbed a rocky outcrop, the warrior leading, every step careful, practiced, his long black hair glinting in the sunlight, tribal jewelry clinking softly with each motion. His presence was a mixture of strength and vigilance, a living shield. Elowen followed closely, gripping her bow, arrow-nocked, her body coiled like a spring ready to strike. From the ridgeline, a volley of arrows rained down, striking the rocks near their feet. Sand exploded around them, stinging skin and drawing curses from Elowen's lips. The warrior moved like a force of nature, dodging, diving, and retaliating with precision, his scarred shoulder flashing as he swung a hand-carved tomahawk. Each movement spoke of experience, regret, and a desperate need to protect the woman at his side. Elowen. "Behind that boulder!" he shouted, voice strong, commanding. She dove behind the jagged stone, sweat and dust coating her skin, heart hammering in rhythm with the desert's relentless pulse. From their vantage point, they could see the attackers' bandits, faces half-masked, eyes gleaming with malice. They underestimated Elowen, underestimated him, underestimated the bond that had grown between them through desert nights and days of hardship. The warrior leapt from cover with the grace of a panther, tomahawk swinging, knocking one assailant off his feet. Elowen's arrows flew true, each strike precise, felling another before he could draw close. The desert became a blur of motion, sand, sweat, firelight from the small flames they had carried from their camp, and the raw, unyielding pulse of survival. Yet in the chaos, the warrior faltered for a heartbeat, the weight of his scarred past pressing down. He stumbled, and Elowen's instinct screamed as she lunged to steady him. Their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement of trust, of shared history, of survival born not just from skill but from connection. "Keep moving," she urged, pulling him toward a narrow canyon pass she had spotted earlier. Together, they navigated the treacherous path, arrows and stones hurling past them, the desert echoing with cries of struggle and the metallic clash of weapons. At last, they reached a hidden alcove, a narrow crevice carved by centuries of wind and sand. The bandits, frustrated and enraged, could not follow. They regrouped, shouting curses that drifted into the canyon like smoke, fading as quickly as they had arrived. Elowen collapsed against the stone, breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. The warrior leaned beside her, shirt clinging to sweat and dust, scarred shoulder rising and falling with each breath. "You are relentless," he said softly, voice tinged with awe and relief. "And you are still here," she replied, voice shaking with adrenaline and a strange mixture of gratitude and frustration. "I almost lost faith in you." He touched the scar lightly, as if it were a silent promise. "I will not fail you again. Not now, not ever. That scar. It reminds me of the past. But it also reminds me of what I must protect." Night descended, painting the canyon walls with deep indigo and shadow. The desert wind whispered around them, carrying the scent of sage and blood, the faint echo of the battles they had survived and the promise of the ones yet to come. Elowen knew, as did the warrior beside her, that the journey was far from over. The desert had tested them, pushed them to the edge, but it had also bound them together scarred and steadfast, hunter and protector, heart and strength. In the stillness of the canyon, as the stars blinked coldly above, a fragile hope lingered, that even in blood and sand, loyalty and trust could endure, and betrayal could someday be avenged or forgiven. The desert sun sank low, bleeding gold and crimson across the horizon. Elowen and the Apache warrior had paused at the edge of a narrow canyon, the jagged cliffs casting long shadows that stretched like fingers over the parched earth. Dust clung to their skin and clothes, sweat streaking their faces, yet both moved with purpose, senses sharpened by weeks of pursuit and evasion. "Elowen," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of confession, "there is something I've never told you. Something about the night your family was attacked." She stopped, dark eyes narrowing against the dying sun. "I've waited for this," she said, her voice tight with anger and hope tangled together. "If there is truth behind that scar, now is the time to tell it." The warrior ran a hand over the jagged mark on his shoulder. "That scar, it was not just from the fight. It was from a choice I made. I tried to shield them, to protect you all, but I failed. And then, in hiding, I made a decision I thought would save lives, but it cost more than I could bear." Elowen clenched her fists. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the faint scent of smoke and sage. "Speak," she demanded. "I need to hear it." He swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the horizon as though the desert itself could judge him. "The raiders came with fire and steel. I confronted them, but they were too many. I could not fight them all, so I lured a part of them away, leaving myself exposed. When I returned, the village was burning. I found only shadows and ashes." Her chest tightened, and a bitter wind whipped dust into her face. "Why didn't you come for me?" Her voice trembled, a mixture of grief and fury. "Why vanish when I needed you? I thought hiding, disappearing, would save you from their wrath. I believed distance would protect you," he admitted, each word steeped in guilt. "But in that choice, I betrayed your trust and my own heart. This scar is not just flesh. It is the proof of my failure, of betrayal." Elowen stared at him, seeing both the weight of the confession and the raw vulnerability in his eyes. The desert seemed to pause around them, the wind softening as though listening. "And yet, you are here," she whispered, "surviving, fighting beside me. Can someone who bears betrayal still redeem themselves?" He stepped closer, bare chest glinting with sweat and dust, scar catching the last rays of sun. "I will spend every day of my life trying, not just to survive, but to honor those I failed, and to protect you. That is all I have left to offer." Her heart ached, a mixture of sorrow and reluctant hope. She had chased vengeance, hunted shadows across mesas and canyons, yet standing here, listening to the truth etched into his body and soul, she realized that survival was no longer just about revenge. It was about trust, loyalty, and the fragile possibility of healing. The sky darkened into twilight, stars beginning to prick the canvas of night. They set up a small camp near a rock overhang, the warrior tending a fire while Elowen cleaned their limited supplies. The crackle of flames filled the silence, each pop and hiss echoing against the canyon walls like whispered confessions. "Elowen," he said softly, breaking the quiet, "I cannot undo the past, but I can fight for the future beside you, with no secrets left between us." She nodded slowly, letting the words settle, a fragile thread of trust weaving itself between them. The desert night was cold, harsh, and unforgiving, yet within its embrace, there was warmth flickering like the fire before them, fragile but persistent. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a reminder that danger still lurked beyond the cliffs. But for the first time in weeks, Elowen allowed herself a small measure of hope. Betrayal had left its mark on him, on her, on the land they traversed, but truth and courage had the power to carve a path forward. The scar, jagged and raw, told a story of failure and remorse. Yet beneath it, in the firelight and the quiet trust of shared survival, a new story began to take shape, one of loyalty, redemption, and the possibility that even in the harshest desert, hearts could mend. The night air was sharp, scented with sage and the faint coppery tang of blood from distant skirmishes. Elowen and the Apache warrior moved cautiously through a narrow canyon pass. the moonlight casting long, jagged shadows that danced across the desert walls. His broad chest was slick with sweat, the scar on his shoulder gleaming faintly in the silver light. Every step was calculated, muscles coiled like springs, eyes scanning for danger that seemed to lurk in every crevice. "Elowen," he murmured, voice low and urgent. "I feel them close, those who betrayed your family. They've tracked us through every canyon, every ridge. We can't outrun them much longer." Her dark eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the horizon. "Then we face them, tonight." She flexed her fingers around the bow she carried, heart pounding, blood racing like wildfire in her veins. Weeks of pursuit, of uncertainty, had sharpened her instincts to a razor's edge. She had survived storms, fire, and death itself, and now she would confront the men who had taken everything. A rustle came from the shadows above. Both froze. From the rocks, a figure emerged, tall, familiar, a cruel grin twisting his face. "Well, well?" "The girl and her scarred guardian," the man sneered. Recognition hit Elowen like a lightning strike. This was the one who had betrayed her family, the one who had struck the first blow in the night of fire. The warrior stepped forward, muscles rippling, long black hair falling over his broad shoulders, tribal jewelry clinking with movement. "Step away from her," he growled. His voice was steel and warning, carrying the weight of the desert itself. The betrayer laughed, low and mocking. "You think you can stop me? You're just one man, and she is alone in the desert. No one to protect her but the scarred coward at her side." The warrior's jaw tightened, the scar across his shoulder a reminder of past failures, a mark that now fueled every ounce of strength he had. He moved with controlled fury, tomahawk in hand, standing between Elowen and the man who had caused so much pain. Elowen's arrow flew, striking the betrayer in the shoulder. He yelped, stumbling back, but the smirk never left his face. "Not enough," he spat, reaching for a knife at his belt. The warrior lunged, a blur of raw power, muscles flexing as he met the man head-on. Dust and sand exploded around them, the sound of flesh striking flesh echoing against the canyon walls. The clash was brutal, swift, a dance of survival and revenge. Every movement carried the weight of betrayal and years of loss. Elowen moved with deadly precision. Every arrow loosed a message of defiance, a declaration of vengeance. Sparks from the metal weapon struck like fireflies in the night. Finally, the betrayer fell to his knees, bloodied, defeated, and trembling with the realization that the hunter had become the hunted. "You?" he gasped, voice broken. "I never expected." The warrior towered over him, chest heaving, scar prominent in the firelight. "Expect nothing," he said, voice low and dangerous. "Your choice brought ruin. Now you answer for it." Elowen stepped forward, bow in hand, eyes hard but not cruel. "This is not just for me," she said, "but for everyone you destroyed. Make your choice. Live with the consequences, or vanish into the desert forever." The betrayer's eyes flicked between the two of them, and for the first time, fear eclipsed arrogance. He slumped, surrendering not just to them, but to the truth of his actions. The desert wind whispered around them, carrying the scent of sage and dust, and for a moment the canyon held its breath. Elowen exhaled slowly, muscles relaxing, though her heart still raced. The warrior's hand brushed against her shoulder in a rare gesture of reassurance, scarred skin warm under her fingers. The night was far from over, the desert still wild and unforgiving, but in that moment the balance had shifted. Justice had been faced, betrayal confronted, and the bonds of trust and survival strengthened between them. Stars shimmered overhead, cold and distant yet unwavering, as if witnessing the silent promise forged in blood and sand, that even amid betrayal, loyalty could endure, and hearts scarred by the past could still find a path forward. The first light of dawn stretched across the desert, spilling gold and crimson over the jagged cliffs. Elowen and the Apache warriors stood at the edge of a wide mesa, the wind tugging at their hair and clothes, carrying the faint scent of sage and distant smoke. The betrayer, defeated and bound, sat slumped against a rock, the weight of his choices pressing down like the desert sun. Elowen's eyes scanned the horizon, dark and determined. "It's over," she said quietly, but her voice carried both relief and the echo of countless battles fought across mesas, canyons, and nights that had seemed endless. "The men who hunted us, the shadows of the past. It's finally over." The warrior, bare-chested, scarred shoulder catching the dawn's light, nodded slowly. His long black hair fell across his face, tribal jewelry clinking softly as he moved. "The desert will still test us," he said, voice rough but calm. "But whatever comes, we face it together. No more secrets. No more betrayals." For a moment, silence held them, broken only by the soft rustle of sagebrush and the distant cry of a hawk. The wind seemed to breathe with them, as if the desert itself acknowledged the trials they had survived, the blood and sweat and tears they had shed. Elowen stepped closer, hand brushing the scarred shoulder that had carried both shame and strength. "You survived the desert, the betrayal, and your own guilt," she whispered. "And you stayed. That counts for more than anything." The warrior's eyes softened, glinting with the first hints of hope he had allowed himself in weeks. "And you survived everything as well," he replied. "I was wrong to doubt that fire in you." She smiled faintly, a rare warmth breaking through the armor of her grief. "We are stronger because of it," she said, voice steady, yet carrying the fragile weight of forgiveness and trust earned in the harshest crucible. The desert around them seemed to shift with the light, turning mesas into shadows of gold, valleys into rivers of amber. Sparks from the small fire they had kept through the night still floated upward, disappearing into the morning sky like tiny stars. They were remnants of struggle, yet also of endurance, of survival against odds that had seemed impossible. The warrior glanced at the bound betrayer, expression unreadable. "Do we leave him?" he asked. "Or do we let him answer to the law?" Elowen's gaze was sharp, thoughtful. "He must face the consequences," she said, "but not in vengeance. Let justice, not bloodlust, guide the end of this story." He nodded, satisfaction and relief mingling in his stance. Together they untied the betrayer and sent him down a winding trail that led to the nearest settlement, ensuring he would answer for his crimes without further bloodshed. With that done, Elowen and the warrior turned back toward the canyon, toward the mesas and ridges they had crossed, the path behind them a tapestry of survival, courage, and scars that told stories of betrayal and redemption. "Do you think the desert ever forgives?" Elowen asked quietly, eyes scanning the rising sun. The warrior smiled faintly, a shadow of a grin beneath his long black hair. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it only rewards those who endure." For the first time in weeks, Elowen felt the weight of fear and anger lift from her chest. The scar on his shoulder, once a symbol of betrayal, now seemed less a wound and more a reminder, a mark of endurance, loyalty, and the hard-earned path toward trust as they walked together across the sunlit mesa. Boots crunching against the dry earth, the wind carried the soft echo of past battles fading into the distance. The desert was still harsh, still unyielding, but they had survived. And in the quiet between the mesas, between the wind and the sand, between the scars and the heart, a fragile peace had begun to bloom. Elowen glanced at him, and he met her gaze with the same quiet understanding that had carried them across deserts, fires, and betrayal. "Together," he said simply. "Together," she agreed, and with that, they vanished into the morning haze, two figures forged by fire and loss, their scars a testament not to betrayal alone but to the resilience of the heart.